They had promised each other forever. 53 years of holding hands, sharing morning coffee, and goodnight kisses. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, Richard woke up to find his wife Martha's hand cold beside him. After 5 decades together, he was suddenly alone. Have you ever wondered what happens in those first crushing moments after losing your life partner? The person who knew where you kept your favorite sweater, who remembered which medicines you took, who laughed at jokes only the two of you understood. Today I'm going to share Richard's story, a real story about love, devastating loss, and how one 78-year-old widower found his way back to living when he thought his life was over. What Richard did in the months following Martha's passing wasn't what his children expected. It wasn't what his friends advised. But his journey changed not only his own life, but the lives of dozens of other seniors facing the same heartbreaking loneliness. If you've lost your spouse, or know someone who has, this story might just show you a path forward that you never considered. And even if you haven't experienced this particular loss, Richard's story will teach you something profound about resilience that applies to any of life's challenges. Stay with me until the end, because Richard's third step is something most grief counselors never mention, yet it made all the difference in his healing journey. It's a lesson about grief that could transform how you face any loss in your life. Richard and Martha had their usual evening routine. They watched their favorite game show, shared a bowl of ice cream, and went to bed around 10 p.m. There was nothing special about that night. No warning signs. No tearful goodbyes. Martha kissed Richard goodnight, turned over on her side, and drifted off to sleep. When Richard woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through their bedroom curtains. He reached over to touch Martha's shoulder to wake her for breakfast, but she didn't stir. Her skin felt cool, too cool. In that terrible moment, Richard knew she was gone. I remember sitting there for what felt like hours, just holding her hand, Richard told me. We had talked about death before. At our age, you have to. But talking about losing someone and actually losing them are worlds apart. Richard's daughter, Jenny, described those first days after her mother's passing. Dad was like a ghost in his own house. He'd sit in Mom's chair, wear Mom's robe. He'd set the table for two and then just stare at the empty plate. This reaction is something Dr. Ellen Williams, a grief counselor specializing in senior loss, calls phantom coupling, continuing routines as if your partner is still present. It's the brain's way of processing an overwhelming loss, she explains. For someone who's been part of a couple for decades, suddenly becoming a single person requires rewiring deep neural pathways. It takes time. For Richard, that time felt endless. The nights were the worst, he recalled. 53 years of saying goodnight to someone, and then suddenly there's no one to answer you. If you've experienced the loss of a spouse, type "I understand" in the comments. Sometimes just knowing others have walked this path can bring a measure of comfort. 3 weeks after Martha's funeral, Richard's children started to worry. Their father wasn't eating properly. He wore the same clothes for days. Bills piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. The vibrant, organized man they knew had disappeared into a fog of grief. I knew I was in trouble when I couldn't remember if I'd eaten lunch that day. Or maybe it was yesterday's lunch I was remembering, Richard admitted. Days blended together. I'd wake up, sit in my chair, and suddenly it would be dark outside. This phenomenon is what grief experts call bereavement fog, a state where normal cognitive functions become impaired by overwhelming sorrow. Your brain, trying to process a significant loss, diverts energy away from everyday tasks. The science behind this is clear. Grief actually changes your brain chemistry. Studies show that grief activates the same pain centers in the brain as physical injury. For seniors who've spent decades with a spouse, this pain can be particularly intense. When you've been married for 50+ years, your identities become intertwined, explains neuropsychologist Dr. James Chen. The brain actually creates shared neural networks. When one spouse dies, the surviving partner's brain must literally rewire itself. For Richard, this rewiring felt impossible. His children suggested grief counseling, but he refused. What good would talking do? He'd ask. It won't bring Martha back. But then came a turning point. One morning, Richard found himself in the kitchen, unable to remember how to make coffee, something he'd done thousands of times. Standing there, staring at the coffee maker Martha had always operated, he broke down. I realized I didn't just lose Martha, he said. I was losing myself too. That day, Richard made an important decision. He called his doctor. This small step number, reaching out for help, would become the first of several actions that would gradually lead him back to living. If grief has ever made simple tasks feel overwhelming for you or someone you love, type "been there" in the comments. Let's create a community of understanding together. Step number 1, creating a structured routine. Richard's doctor referred him to a grief counselor who specialized in helping seniors. During their first session, the counselor, Dr. Peterson, suggested something that seemed too simple to be effective. Create a daily schedule and follow it religiously. I remember thinking it was ridiculous. Richard laughed. How would writing down "eat breakfast" on a piece of paper help with the crushing pain in my chest? But Dr. Peterson explained that grief disrupts our sense of normalcy and control. For our brains and bodies, routine provides an anchor when emotions threaten to overwhelm us. Together, they created a simple schedule. 7:00 a.m. Wake up, shower, get dressed. 7:30 a.m. Eat breakfast while listening to the morning news. 8:30 a.m. Take a 15-minute walk around the neighborhood. 9:00 a.m. Handle one household task. 10:00 a.m. Call one person. 12:00 p.m.
1:00 p.m. Rest or hobby time.
3:00 p.m. Another short walk. 5:00 p.m. Dinner. 6:00 p.m. TV or reading. 9:00 p.m. Bedtime routine. Richard posted this schedule on his refrigerator and forced himself to follow it, even when it felt meaningless. The first week was mechanical, he explained. I felt like a robot going through motions. But gradually something changed. What changed was Richard's brain chemistry. Neuroscience shows that predictable routines reduce stress hormones like cortisol, which are often elevated during grief. Lower cortisol levels allow for clearer thinking and better emotional regulation. For seniors especially, this structured approach provides necessary stability. After retirement and the loss of a spouse, many seniors lose two major structuring elements of life simultaneously. By the end of the first month following his daily schedule, Richard noticed he was having moments, brief ones at first, when he wasn't actively thinking about Martha's absence. The crushing weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it had become manageable enough that he could function. I started with basic self-care, Richard explained. Showering every day, eating regular meals. Things Martha would have expected of me. Eventually, I realized I was doing these things, not because she would have wanted it, but because I deserved care too. The schedule provided something else too, small victories. Each completed task became proof that Richard could survive another day without Martha. Have you found that creating structure helps during difficult times? Share a routine that's helped you cope with life's challenges in the comments below. If you are still watching this video and finding these insights valuable, please comment step number 1 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Step number 2, finding purpose through helping others. 3 months after Martha's passing, Richard faced another hurdle: endless empty hours. His daily routine provided structure, but purpose was still missing. I kept asking myself, what's the point? Richard said. For 5 decades, being Martha's husband gave my life meaning. Who was I now? This question haunts many widowers. Studies show that men over 65 who lose their spouses are at higher risk for depression, partly because they often lose their sense of purpose along with their partner. Richard's breakthrough came unexpectedly. While at the grocery store one afternoon, part of his Tuesday routine, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to reach a can on a high shelf. Without thinking, he helped her, and they started chatting. Her name was Dorothy, and she had lost her husband 7 years earlier. As they talked in the cereal aisle, she mentioned a widower's support group at the local senior center. Richard politely took the information but had no intention of attending. The last thing I wanted was to sit in a circle talking about feelings, he chuckled. But Dorothy was persistent. She called me 3 times before I finally agreed to go, mostly just to stop the calls. That reluctant visit changed everything. The group wasn't what Richard expected. Yes, there were discussions about grief, but the main focus was on service projects, ways for widowers to use their skills to help others in the community. They were rebuilding a ramp for a disabled veteran that week, Richard recalled. I'd been a carpenter before retirement. For the first time since Martha died, someone needed skills only I could provide. This approach aligns perfectly with research findings. Studies show that helping others triggers the release of endorphins, natural mood elevators in the brain. For seniors processing grief, altruistic activities create a double benefit. They provide social connection while also restoring a sense of purpose and usefulness. Richard began volunteering 3 days a week. He helped build accessibility ramps for seniors returning home from hospitals. He repaired cabinets for single mothers. He taught basic carpentry skills to at-risk youth at the community center. When you're grieving, you're focused inward, Richard explained. Helping others forces you to look outward. You can't solve your own problems by obsessing over them, but sometimes you can find healing by solving someone else's problems. 6 months into his volunteer work, Richard noticed a profound change. He still missed Martha deeply, but the pain had transformed. He could talk about her without breaking down. He could appreciate memories without being crushed by her absence. One day, I was showing a teenager how to sand wood properly, and I found myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months, Richard said. I realized Martha would be proud of this, me passing on skills to the next generation. This cognitive shift, from focusing on loss to honoring a loved one's legacy through meaningful action, marks an important transition in healthy grief processing. For widowers especially, finding purpose through contribution addresses a critical emotional need that talk therapy alone might miss. Men often process grief through action rather than conversation, making service projects particularly effective for healing. Has helping others ever helped you through a difficult time? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else to take this healing step. Step number 3, redefining identity in relationships. 9 months after Martha's passing, Richard faced a challenge that many widowers find particularly difficult: social reconnection. While his volunteer work provided interaction, he still spent evenings and weekends alone. My married friends still invited me to dinner, but I felt like a fifth wheel, Richard explained. And honestly, seeing couples together just reminded me of what I'd lost. This social isolation is common among widowers. Studies show that men over 60 are particularly vulnerable to withdrawal after losing a spouse. Women typically maintain broader social networks throughout life, while men often rely primarily on their partners for emotional connection. Richard's children worried about his isolation. They kept trying to set me up on dates, he laughed. They meant well, but I wasn't ready for that. Martha wasn't replaceable. What Richard needed wasn't dating advice, but help navigating his new identity as a single person after decades of being half of a couple. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source: a memoir writing class at the local library. Richard's daughter Jenny convinced him to attend, thinking it might help him process his grief. I went to shut her up, honestly, Richard admitted. I had no interest in writing about my feelings, but the teacher, a retired English professor named Eleanor, approached it differently. She had us write about moments that defined who we were, before, during, and potentially after marriage. This exercise forced Richard to confront an essential truth. He had an identity before meeting Martha. He had developed new aspects of identity during their marriage, and now he needed to discover who he could be after Martha. Eleanor had us make 3 lists, Richard explained. Things I was before marriage, things I became during marriage, and things I might become now. That last list was nearly blank at first, but slowly I added to it. This process of identity reconstruction is crucial for widowers, according to psychologist Dr. Robert Williams. Grief isn't just about processing the absence of someone you love, he explains. It's also about reconstructing your sense of self without them. For someone married 50+ years, this is profound identity work. Through weekly writing assignments, Richard began excavating parts of himself that had been dormant during his marriage. He had once loved landscape photography, but had set it aside when Martha's arthritis made hiking difficult. He had enjoyed jazz concerts in his youth, but switched to Martha's preference for classical music. I wasn't becoming someone new, Richard clarified. I was rediscovering parts of myself while honoring the growth that happened with Martha. She would actually be annoyed if she thought I'd stopped living because she was gone. As Richard reconnected with his individual interests, something unexpected happened. His social world expanded. The photography club introduced him to fellow enthusiasts. Jazz concerts connected him with music lovers. His volunteer work brought him into contact with other service-minded individuals. None of these new friends replaced Martha or our old friends, Richard emphasized. But they represented connections based on who I am now, not just who I was as Martha's husband. 18 months after Martha's passing, Richard had constructed a life that honored her memory while allowing him to continue growing. He still had moments of profound grief, particularly on anniversaries and holidays, but he had built a meaningful life around his loss rather than despite it. The most important thing I learned, Richard reflected, is that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. Every new experience, every new friendship carries Martha's influence with it. She helped make me who I am, and that doesn't disappear because she's gone. Has your identity ever shifted dramatically due to life circumstances? How did you navigate that change? Share your experience in the comments to help others who might be going through similar transitions. 2 years after Martha's passing, Richard experienced something he never anticipated. He found himself looking forward to his memoir writing class, not just for the writing, but for the conversations with Eleanor, the instructor. It snuck up on me, Richard admitted. We were friends first, just two people who enjoyed discussing books and ideas. I didn't recognize my feelings as anything more than friendship until my daughter pointed it out. This development created unexpected emotional turmoil. Richard felt guilty, as if developing feelings for someone new somehow betrayed Martha's memory. This guilt is extremely common among widowers, particularly those who had happy marriages. I actually stopped attending the class for a month, Richard said. I couldn't face Eleanor because I felt like I was being unfaithful to Martha. During this struggle, Richard returned to his grief counselor, who offered perspective that changed everything. Your heart is not a fixed-size container with limited capacity for love. Love expands the container. This concept, that loving someone new doesn't diminish the love that came before, was transformative for Richard. After careful reflection, he returned to class and eventually asked Eleanor to dinner. Their relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully. Both had lost spouses. Both understood the complex emotions involved in opening one's heart after profound loss. Eleanor never tried to replace Martha in my life, Richard explained. And I never tried to replace her husband, Thomas. We created something new together, something that honored our pasts while allowing for a different future. Research supports this healthy approach. Studies show that widowers who find new companionship after appropriately processing their grief often experience improved physical and mental health outcomes. However, the timing matters greatly. Rushing into new relationships before processing grief typically leads to complications. Richard and Eleanor married in a small ceremony 3 years after Martha's passing. Their wedding included special moments honoring both Martha and Thomas. Photographs displayed prominently, a moment of reflection during the ceremony. My children were concerned at first, Richard acknowledged. They worried I was trying to replace their mother. But over time, they saw that wasn't the case. Eleanor became a friend to them, not a replacement mother. This late-in-life relationship brought Richard unexpected joy. At 81, I never imagined I'd feel like a newlywed again, he laughed. It's different from my life with Martha, not better or worse, just different. Martha will always be part of who I am, and Eleanor understands and respects that. Richard's story illustrates an important truth. Grief and joy can coexist. Finding happiness after loss doesn't dishonor what came before. It builds upon it. The greatest gift Martha gave me was teaching me how to love deeply, Richard reflected. That capacity didn't die with her. In a way, my relationship with Eleanor honors Martha's impact on my life. Have you or someone you know found new love after loss? What challenges and joys came with that experience? Share your thoughts in the comments. 5 years after Martha's passing, Richard noticed something remarkable. Men from his volunteer group and community were coming to him for advice. They'd heard his story and wanted guidance on navigating their own grief journeys. At first, I felt unqualified, Richard admitted. Who was I to give advice? But then I realized I had something valuable to offer. The perspective of someone who'd walked the same difficult path. With encouragement from Eleanor, Richard started a monthly gathering specifically for widowers over 60. Unlike traditional support groups that focus primarily on emotional expression, Richard's approach emphasized practical step numbers and actionable strategies. Many older men aren't comfortable sitting around talking about feelings, Richard explained. But they'll open up while working on a project together or discussing concrete problems to solve. These gatherings combine skill sharing, community service, and grief processing in ways that particularly resonated with older men. They built wheelchair ramps while discussing the challenges of cooking for one. They repaired community garden beds while sharing strategies for handling holidays alone. This approach addresses a critical gap in grief support. Research shows that men and women often process grief differently, yet most grief support programs use approaches better suited to typically female grieving patterns. Richard's program offered an alternative that many men found more accessible. The impact extended beyond emotional support. Participants reported improved physical health, reduced isolation, and greater sense of purpose. Several men who had considered moving into assisted living found renewed confidence in their ability to maintain independence. What surprised me most, Richard reflected, was how helping others through grief actually continued my own healing. Each time I share Martha's and my story, I understand our life together in new ways. Richard's initiative caught the attention of local healthcare providers, who began referring recently widowed men to the group. 5 years after its founding, over 60 widowers had participated, with many returning as mentors for newer members. We don't fix grief, Richard emphasized. That's not possible, or even desirable. What we do is help each other carry it more skillfully, so it doesn't prevent us from continuing to live meaningful lives. This ripple effect, one person's healing journey inspiring others, illustrates how personal tragedy can ultimately create community good. What began as Richard's darkest chapter became a source of light for dozens of others. Has someone else's experience ever helped you through a difficult time? Or have you found purpose in sharing your own struggles to benefit others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you are still watching this video and finding these insights valuable, please comment step number 1 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating good content to inform and inspire you. Richard's journey from devastating loss to renewed purpose didn't happen overnight. It required daily choices to keep moving forward, even when grief made every step number feel impossible. His story reminds us that there's no single right way to grieve, but there are paths that lead back to joy and meaning. If you're watching this because you've lost your spouse, please know this: the pain you feel honors the love you shared, but living fully again also honors that love. As Richard often says, the best way to remember those we've lost is to live in ways that would make them proud. For those supporting a widowed friend or family member, remember that your presence matters more than finding the right words. Simple gestures, a regular phone call, help with practical tasks, or just sitting quietly together create space for both grief and healing. Richard's story teaches us that loss, while permanent, doesn't have to permanently define us. We can build lives of purpose and even joy that include our grief, rather than being consumed by it. If this story touched you or made you think of someone who might benefit from hearing it, please share this video with them. Your share might reach someone exactly when they need this message most. And if you'd like to see more content like this, real stories that offer hope and practical guidance, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. Each subscription helps us continue creating content that supports seniors through life's most challenging transitions. Have you experienced profound loss? What helped you find your way forward? Share your wisdom in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today.